Alright, hi everyone, it is the 18th of May, off day today, so I was, not working out, which, feels like a blessing sometimes, and, today I did get a solid amount of work done on the book. My partner is at the Beyonce concert in Seattle tonight, so, that frees up some time to sit in front of my computer by myself and make videos and write things. Aside from that, did not get very much done at work today. Actually busy at work, which happens occasionally. And the main thing I was focusing on today was the circuit training section. And circuit training is kind of interesting because it's not a bad thing per se, but it's kind of easy to screw up, and the way it's done is very often screwed up. So the premise of circuit training is that you're putting a bunch of exercises in sequence, and then you're doing circuits through all of them. In the strictest sense of the circuit, you're just doing like X, like X, Y, Z, A, B, C, repeat, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, etc. Whereas there's lots of ways to vary it up. So some people might do, like a certain amount of time at each station. So you might say, 5 minutes of this exercise, rest, 5 minutes of this exercise, rest, and you're done when you've just done one circuit of everything. So there's lots of different ways to do it, and some of those make more sense than others. The thing is, so kind of the benefit of it is that it works really well in a group class setting, in that it keeps things moving. If you've got, like 8 people in a group class and you've got 8 different exercises you're going to do in that class, you have 2 options. You can either do it the standard way, which would be to have 8 sets of equipment, one for everybody, and then you have 8 people doing bicep curls, and then 8 people doing chest presses, and then 8 people doing, whatever. And obviously, particularly with stuff like, weight machines, which are really expensive, you're not going to have like 8 copies of everything. So it makes more sense when you've got a lot of people to have each one of them do one exercise and then just cycle through it. And that keeps things a little more interesting too, because instead of having 8 people doing bicep curls all at once and going, oh, okay, this is great, they're switching off and they can kind of, it's a little more active. Now, that's kind of its greatest strength and its greatest weakness, because it doesn't really work very well with single people. Because if I'm one person and I've got eight stations set up, I'm taking up a crap ton of space to the gym, and everyone around me is going to hate me. Anyone who wants any of the equipment that I'm using. So that's not always a great idea if you're just one person. And the problem with a lot of this is a generalized problem with group classes, and not just with circuit-based ones, but a lot of group classes do not adequately focus on actually improving their clients. And that's simply because, in many cases, clients are not going to be there all the time. They're not going to, it doesn't make sense to make this really weirdly, strictly periodized program or really carefully track everything that everyone's doing, simply because, what if they don't come in the next time you do something similar, or the next time you do something totally different, there's so many variables in play that it doesn't make sense to write down, like, what everyone did on the bench press, for example. So the problem with that is that you take people, like, we'll use the bench press again for an example. Let's take 8 people, and the bench press is one of the 8 stations. So at the beginning of the workout, you're explaining the 8 stations to everyone. You explain the bench press. Some of these people have probably never done a bench press before, or they have, but they don't really know their limits. They don't really know what a good number is. So they come up to the station and they pick some kind of weight, and that weight is probably not a good weight for them. It might not be challenging enough. It might be too challenging. It's probably not ideal for whatever they're trying to, whatever your goal is in the situation. And then, of course, the next person that comes to the bench press, they may not want to use the same weight. They might be stronger or weaker than the other person, or, have better or worse endurance. But because there's kind of an emphasis on moving quickly through these stations, you might not bother to actually change the weight. So, if I could probably use 155 pounds on that bench press, and the guy in front of me did 135 pounds, I'm less inclined to go ahead and round up a couple 10-pound plates to slap on there so that I can, get a good workout in. And And likewise, even if I did, that would slow things down. And the more you slow things down, sooner or later, someone starts, if everyone's supposed to be moving at the same time, then what happens is that you start, sort of bunching up behind whoever is being the slowest or whatever station is naturally the slowest. And that's sort of alleviated in versions where you have programmed rests in between the stations, because that way, you can use that rest time to set up or, take down or, get prepared for that station. But yeah, very, very frequently it sort of encourages people to rush and not really pay too much attention to how much weight they're using, and that's bad, because the most important thing to getting better is measuring your progress and, carefully improving upon that, overloading that so you get better over time. If you're just doing the same thing over and over again, or if you're just using a random weight every time, you're not getting any better. You're not getting much out of it. You're just sort of, sweating and working out. And that's the biggest problem. That's sort of, everything right there. Circuit training is supposed to also inspire more cardiovascular, a higher cardiovascular effect than traditional weight training, because you're moving so quickly, because you're keeping your heart rate up. Heart rate being up is not the only thing that has to do with, it's not the single factor that determines how much cardio, how good of a cardio effect you're getting out of it. And there's a lot of reasons why, but I don't really have time to go into them right now, but essentially it's much smarter just to do an actual cardio exercise, because you get a much better benefit out of it. It is better than if you weren't doing any cardio at all and you were lifting, versus if you weren't doing any cardio at all and you were doing circuits. Well, the circuits would be a little bit better, yeah, but it would be a much more efficient use of your time just to do some cardio on the side as well. So I don't recommend, focusing on that just for the cardiovascular benefit. Now, of course, circuits are also really useful if you are doing something that requires that you would be good at doing a circuit. So a lot of strongman events, a lot of CrossFit events, some of kind of like the Warrior Dash and obstacle races like that. Those are all examples of things that actually kind of do resemble circuits, and that you're doing exercises in sequence in a certain sense. And so you do need to be good at that. And in that case, you do need to use circuits to train. And ideally, you do circuits as similar to the initial, the event as possible. So if I've got to do a Warrior Dash, and I've got to do a certain amount of running, and then one exercise, and a certain amount of running, and another exercise, well, I should train by doing those exercises in that order, and instead of just kind of doing some completely different circuit that has nothing to do with it. And one cool thing about CrossFit, one great thing about CrossFit, is that they recognize that limitation, and so they have a thing called, benchmark workouts, or workouts that you return and repeat over time. And the good thing about that is that each time you do it, you record your results, and then you do that workout again, so you can, try and beat your previous results. You can do better than you did last time. That's a good idea, because that does enable you to focus on overloading and improving. Unfortunately, again, that's not seen in a lot of group class settings, simply because there's not that much effort or thought put into it. When you're doing a circuit training, when you're putting together a circuit for exercises for clients, you need to be very careful on the exercise selection, because if you pair together two exercises that don't make sense, that's going to impact your subsequent recovery, and that's going to mean that the next time you get around to that, you're not going to do as well. The classic example I like to use is having a deadlift and then following it up by something involving, standing, like for example, a standing overhead press. So if you're doing if the deadlift is heavy enough to challenge you, and it should be, because otherwise there's no point to doing it. If the deadlift is heavy enough to challenge you, then it's also wearing out your lower back. And if your lower back is worn out, then it's going to compromise your ability to stabilize your core when you're pushing overhead while standing. So, you're not going to be able to overhead press as well, but just because you deadlifted before it. Whereas if you had done it in a different order, you might have been able to do the same, better on the overhead press. So there's a lot of little things like that where you have to be kind of careful about how you put stuff together, because if you don't put stuff together right, then it's not going to mesh together well. And that's another huge problem, is that a lot of people that put these circuits together aren't really smart enough to throw together stuff that doesn't interfere with each other. So you see, oh, I'm going to do box jumps and then lunges, and then, they just kind of throw some random stuff together, and it's like, well, that's just making it worse, because you're not really allowing, your body to recover between stuff. So you're just kind of doing everything in an exhausted state where you can't perform as well. You're not getting as much of an effect out of it versus doing the exercises on their own, and that means a subsequent decrease in performance. So the other thing is that circuits work better when you keep them smaller. So if you have fewer exercises in play, if you have fewer variables to go wonky, then you have a better circuit. And when you take that to the other extreme end, what you have is, supersets, trisets. These are things that bodybuilders have been doing for years, where you just take 2 exercises back and forth, and that way you can get the maximum effect in terms of, minimizing your recovery times, while also minimizing the amount of potential interference that can go on when you're throwing 8 different exercises into the mix and you're having to juggle how, exactly what happens when. So those things are great, and they also work a lot better if you're just by yourself. If I'm just by myself and I'm taking up 2 stations or 2 exercises, that's a lot less likely to piss people off at the gym than if I take up 8 stations or 8 exercises. So those are a lot more workable. Those are a lot more applicable to an individual level. But, again, they're not perfect. They do allow you to get some more work in, but they're not necessarily a superior cardiovascular, activity. And, they're certainly not, massively superior for building strength or building muscle or anything like that. So circuits can be used effectively. I think that very frequently they're not. I think that CrossFit is an example in which sometimes they use it ineffectively, but very often they do it right, and that's a good thing. But a lot of group classes that employ that sort of stuff just aren't good. So, yeah, circuits, good and bad. Depends on how you use them. That's really all there is to it. All right, got a little bit excited. Anyway, I think I'm going to go to bed now. I'm pretty tired. I got to be up early in the morning. So, as always, like, comment, share. See you guys later.